But the students in California had, in the face of 32% increase in the tuition of the CU system, had launched militant actions, and they're at a much higher level of organization. On October 24, they had a statewide meeting, hundreds of people attending, representing not only students in the state school system, but also faculty and teachers and other workers in solidarity. So, and on October 24th, they decided that they would call for March 4 to be statewide day of action in California. In New York, and shortly before that in November, when they were actually voting on, when the board that governs the CU system was voting on a tuition increase, the students' response to that was to launch militant actions and actually occupied UC Santa Cruz, building UC Santa Cruz in Berkeley and one other school. And it galvanized the student movement, not just in this country, but actually all over the world, because there were large demonstrations in Eastern Europe in response to the cuts and tuition increases there. So after that happened, we began talking in New York about the possibility of calling a national day of action to defend education. And we were inspired by what they did in California. And as we began to research the possibility of that and contacting people throughout the country that we had worked with before, and for students, a part of student organizations, we found that the students in California, they had called for March 4 to be the statewide day of action. And we thought that because of that, because their level of organization, the militancy of the struggle there, that it would be correct that if we were going to call for national day of action, it should be March 4. So we began contacting the students in California and other students around the country. And from that point, it all sort of came together. We organized a conference call. Over 40 people attended the conference call. And from that, we put together a national statement that reflected, the fact that this country's in economic crisis. Young people are being forced to choose the military or school, or they're pushed into prison. Also, what's happening to teachers and the fact that the public school system is being privatized. So the call reflects that. In California, they put out a call in solidarity. There's two different national calls, and they're in solidarity with one another. Their call from California calls for strikes, student strikes. On March 4, California might get a student strike. We may even get it in New York, but it's hard to know and it's hard to tell whether or not that can happen in other places. So that's the reason why in our call we didn't call necessarily for a strike. Sometimes these things, as militant as they may sound, you don't want to call for something and then you fail and people get demoralized. But the calls are in solidarity with one another. So if we get strikes, it's all better. But even just to have a nationwide day of action to defend education, and we should really look at this as what it is. It's actually nationwide mobilization against the economic crisis. And I think it's probably the first one that's happened since the economic crisis, and it's being led by students. And so, it's something that obviously, because of not one day of action, not one mobilization, even if it's nationwide, is something that's actually going to push back against the budget cuts that are happening all across the country. I don't think anybody expects that, but it's a beginning, and from there it lays the ground, it lays the foundation for us to actually revitalize the student movement that really hasn't really been a national student movement probably since the fight to end apartheid in South Africa. So it lays, it's possible that coming out of March 4th, that there could be a national student movement, and I think it's important that. That it start. I mean, hope it would have been better if it had started earlier, but no time for action is actually, is always right on time. So, students, it's students, like many students in this particular period, and it's important that it be that working class organizations and working people relate to it. And even though a lot of students in this particular period may have never even had a job. And that's just the reality. We're talking about the largest unemployment of young people since they actually started keeping records. And it's a crisis for young people to not be able to find employment, you know, that can, not just any kind of employment, but something that you can actually live off of. So we have to put that, you know, to bring that sort of connection there if it's lacking, because if the student movement, wherever there's struggle on the ground, it's progressive and radical and militant struggle, even if it's not necessarily from the sectors that we would hope it to be from. It's important to unite with it because it strengthens all the other movements that have not been emboldened enough to actually take action and be on the ground struggling. The students being on the ground struggling can embolden, you know, the movement of the unemployed around the country. It can embolden, you know, all these different movements of people who've been pushed too far and beaten down, and oppressed people, and LGBT women, and all the things that are happening within our society. All these things, they're sort of coming together at this point, because these students come from, you know, these are students that oppressed students, people of color, you know, LGBT women, who have an understanding that the situation that's being forced upon them comes from a much larger context, a larger political context of an economic crisis. So, you know, it's a great opportunity, I think, and I think that what we'll have after when we wake up the next morning after March 4, March 5th, we will see that it will revitalize the movement in general, and that bodes well for us, especially as we go into May Day and we go into the summer, and the conditions continue to get worse, and they're expecting that unemployment, we're going to live with double-digit unemployment at least until 2013, 2014. So I think that this year, 2010, even though it just began, I think it's going to be a year that people are going to look to years from now and say, this was a very strong year. They're going to equate it to other years in history that were militant years of action. That's what I believe. And I think March 4 is maybe the beginning, you know, of this year of struggle. And, you know, so I'm happy that being here in Michigan, we've been able to talk to so many students, and have found that there's movement on the ground for March 4th. Something is going to happen here for March 4th, and it's important that it does, because Michigan, there's no other state in this country that has been hit as hard as Michigan, no other city that has been hit as hard as Detroit, and people have been demoralized. The young people we spoke to in Mumford, all they've known is their entire lives, 15 to 16, is boarded up buildings and shuttered factories. Right? That's been their reality for their entire lives. But it doesn't mean that they can't dream and think of something better. And they see their education crumbling. And, you know, students, we've all been in high school, and I'm sure we all hated it. Not all of us, but many of us probably hated it for many different reasons. But they know that they're being shafted. They know that something is wrong. They know something's wrong when they walk through the metal detector in their school. They know something is wrong when a third of the seats in the auditorium don't even work and they can't sit down. They don't just go to the schools because, you know, they're afraid of getting in trouble. They go because they expect to get something out of it. So I think that we just have to go out there and reach them, and we'll find that they'll be willing to fight. They see, that they understand that it is something worth fighting for, and they see movement on the ground. So.